Maple.org. We're here today at Smoky Lake Maple Products with Jim, Angela, and Matt. And today's topic for Maple School is taste and quality. They're going to cover all the factors that contribute to the characteristics. And please feel free to join in the conversation with your questions and comments. And we'll be sure to integrate that in the conversation. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Jamie. I'm really excited about your new organization, the United Maple Producers, and want to thank everybody else for coming and checking out their page. We're really happy to sponsor you, and it's just going to be a really exciting resource, I think. So our topic is taste and quality, as you know. And I thought I'd first start off by telling you what kinds of things are looked at in a maple syrup contest. So there's a lot of different things that are judged. I actually have a handout that Jamie posted earlier so that you can see what I'm referencing. It'll look like this. So the first thing we check is density. We want to make sure it's not over-dense. We also check clarity. It can't be cloudy. We do taste testing, of course. That's the biggest category. We separate everything out by color so that everybody is being judged by other syrups of the same color category. We also look at the container. Got to make sure that it's clean and attractive and looks nice. So as I was preparing for this, I kind of realized there's a lot of different ways you can taste syrup. There's a lot of things that affect your perception of it and, what you think the quality of a given syrup is. So first, I wanted to talk about tasting maple syrup with your eyes. That's the first impression that everyone has, is how it looks. So for one, we have to look at the type of container it's in and make sure it's clean. And also the type of container it's in can also affect the flavor. So Matt, do you want to talk about using plastic?
Using plastic maple is very easy. It's lightweight. Syrup will keep a good quality for 3 to 6 months. Anything longer, you want to try to get it out of the plastic so it doesn't take on a bad plasticky taste. Make sure your containers are made for maple syrup. They're made for a higher temperature than a normal plastic container that would be food grade. If it's not, maple containers are made with a thicker wall, and your bottles will collapse because of the vacuum that's created with the hot syrup in them. What other things?
I think you covered everything. Oh, shipping.
Shipping. You can ship plastic, whereas glass bottles and containers you can't. And that's all I have on plastic.
So as Matt mentioned, plastic has its place in maple syrup storage. Mainly it's very shippable. That's the big thing about it. My problem with plastic is it hides the beauty, which is a big part of maple syrup. Holding a clean glass bottle full of maple syrup, which we should have on this table to show you. It's beautiful. You hold it up to the sunlight and it shows beautiful color. And here's a good example of it. I guess we'll get that up to the window here in a little bit. But maple syrup is absolutely beautiful. As you make maple syrup, it'll appear in many different colors and grades, but every single one of them is beautiful as long as it's clean. Which brings me to the next thing. Plastic hides a lot of things. If you don't have your filtering process down perfectly, plastic is sort of a good choice for some people in that way. Not that they're hiding things that are harmful, but plastic will hide sugar sand that they weren't able to get out. Sugar sand, keep in mind, sugar sand is not a harmful thing. It's visually unpleasant and a little unpalatable if you get some in your mouth. It doesn't affect flavor very much, but it's gritty. While glass, you can't get away with those things. People are going to see every single thing that's in the bottle, not just the syrup, but the impurities as well. So getting your filtering process down is very important. And we have cone filtering systems, which is the most basic way of filtering maple syrup for a hobbyist. And it is that simple. Just the syrup goes in the cone and gravity allows it to fall through. It is not perfect. And it's a very frustrating way for a producer to make maple syrup. Flat filters are a better choice. A container like this, there's a drop-in filter tray that will go in there. The filters will be retained by that filter tray. Most importantly, keep in mind, even after you filter your syrup, the sugar sand will precipitate again. Every time your syrup reaches a temperature of about 193 degrees Fahrenheit, it will precipitate more sugar sand. To prevent that from happening, we need to keep direct flame or direct burner heat away from the syrup. Even if you do keep your syrup at 180 or 190 degrees, the point where your burner actually contacts the bottom of a pan will be much hotter than that. It might be the boiling point even. It might reach the boiling point of your syrup, or maybe even more on the sugar molecules. So to prevent that hot point sugar sand precipitation, it's important to use a water-jacketed bottler which will actually have a water bath around the entire syrup container, so that there's actually a buffer. There's a water buffer in between the heating element and the syrup. Another less complicated way of doing that is to have a steam tray. You see, this is a tray that you fill with water, and this can sit on a gas burner on your electric range top, whatever you choose for heat. But the point is, it keeps the direct flame from the floor of this pan here. That and keeping your actual temperature far away from boiling. Try to keep it between 180 and 190, and you will keep from preventing more sugar sand after you filter. When you're using glass bottles, they are more tedious than plastic in some ways. When the bottles leave the glass factory, they are sanitary, but the way they're sent to you it's not necessarily sanitary. So they'll come to you in normally a cardboard box. The bottles will be placed uncapped in the cardboard boxes upside down. It is a good idea to clean them, to at least do a hot water rinse. That gets into other things like density issues that can come from that. If you do a hot water rinse, of course, there's water in there that can change the density of your syrup once it goes in. So after you do a hot water rinse, they should be dried before you put syrup in. Very importantly, keep things clean. When you are filling these bottles, if you happen to run syrup down the side, get that off. That leaves an unpleasant impression on someone. If they touch your bottle, if they pick it up at a farmer's market or something, and it's sticky, that leaves a very poor impression. Also, as it's sticky, it will collect dirt. It gets worse and worse. Also, don't you dare let syrup sit on these threads and then thread the lid on over the top of that. That's a very poor impression when someone tries getting the lid off and they're breaking sugar, and dried sugar is falling into their hand as they open it. That's a very unprofessional, it's a poor way to present your beautiful, perfect product. So keep the syrup clean and make sure it enters the bottle at least 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Put the lid on. All the lids will have a type of seal that'll make a very positive seal on the bottle. So no syrup on the threads or on the lip. Thread the handle on reasonably tight. Some people swear by leaving the bottle on their side until the syrup cools off. I don't do that. The point of tipping the bottle on its side is to kill bacteria that might be present in the lid or on the top of the bottle where the syrup hasn't touched. So by turning the bottle on its side, you kill the bacteria that might be living in there. And then I put it right back in the box. I don't leave it on their side. That entices some of these bottles to roll. It just gets messy. I tilt it on its side for a second, and then I put it in the box and put it away. But I favor glass. I like the look of the glass bottles. There's some very beautiful bottles available, and they're cost effective too.
So one last point about tasting with your eyes is sugar crystals. That's another thing that if you don't know a lot about maple syrup, you might think, oh, the syrup has gone bad, or I've had people ask me that. Really, there's nothing wrong with the syrup. It's just the syrup was overdense, and the sugar is precipitating out of it and forming crystals at the bottom of your jar. So yeah, do you want to talk about how we can make sure the density is correct?
Correct, yeah, sure. And that's a very good point, and it's very important. Make sure your maple syrup going in the bottle is maple syrup. Make sure it's not over-dense. Maple syrup is identified by a syrup that's between 66 and 66.9 Brix, percent sugar. In Vermont, it must be 66.9. So make sure of that. So let's just say you've tested your density of syrup coming off the evaporator and it looks good. That means nothing by the time it gets to the bottler. It means almost nothing. Because a lot of things happened since then. You've filtered, you've got it into a bottler, you might have spilled some, whatever. There was a big period of time where this hot syrup was steaming. It was evaporating. So checking your density in the bottler is crucial. Keeping the lid on at all times is crucial. When you pick up your lid and it's full of condensation that pours off, make sure that that's pouring back into your syrup. That's where it belongs. That's where that condensation came from. Don't let that pour on the ground. Don't wipe it off with a rag. Make sure that that water stays in the syrup. Keep it stirred in. And do your density tests. We deal with Hanna refractometers. It's a high-end digital way of checking your temperature. But by far a better way of checking your density is with a Murphy cup and a hydrometer. These two devices together will be unequivocally the most accurate way of verifying your density. And I'm not going to get too far into that now, but we will be touching, we will be going deeply into that in other videos.
Okay. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
And Matt. So, okay, I want to go on to another category now, tasting with your nose. Did you know if you were blindfolded and had your nose plugged, it would be very difficult to tell the difference between an apple and a potato? It's true. So, of course, they feel different, but I mean the taste. Your nose is that connected to taste that, you know, it can fool you. You can be fooled if smell is not part of it. So, so what do we know about tasting with our nose? For one, use your nose for checking your sap. If your sap stinks, don't use it. That's a good rule of thumb. If your syrup stinks, probably don't use it. You're not going to want to store your syrup in barrels in any place where there's weird odors. So maybe in a building with a lot of exhaust or near a bunch of mothballs. You know, all those smells can leach into your syrup and really affect the flavor. So we don't want that. So, okay, so we've talked about tasting with our eyes, tasting with our nose. We also taste by the feeling. What's the texture of the syrup? Matt, did you want to talk about that? I caught him off guard. So just those two things.
Taste by feeling. You get an effect from the way it looks, which can lead to a feel that if it has a lot of sugar sand in the bottom, you take a sample of that syrup, you have like a gritty, sandpapery feel on your tongue. It just looks unpleasant. With sour sap, you got to keep an eye on your temperature of inside and outside when you collect. If you collect at night, make sure it wasn't an 80-degree day. That can spoil sap, which will turn in, if you go ahead and boil it, it'll stink. It'll give you sour syrup. If you have too high of a temperature on your syrup, it can get jelly in between boils. That pretty much wraps up tasting by feeling. And
Cool, thank you, Matt.
Yep.
We actually had a situation like that this past season. It was the first time we boiled here in our showroom, and prior to this we were really used to boiling outside where it's always really cold. Well, in the showroom it's nice and warm, and the sap did not last until our next boil. So we had to empty out the whole flue pan and start with fresh sap. So beware of that. You don't want, the higher the temperature, ambient temperature, the faster your sap is going to spoil. All right, tasting with your taste buds. That's normally what people think of when I say tasting, but there's a bunch of different off flavors, and we can go through where these off flavors come from. Let's see. Oh, but before that, when we're doing maple judging, one thing I always tell the other taste testers is to make sure you swirl the syrup in your mouth, and you want to taste it with all parts of your tongue. And it's not just your first impression of the syrup. You have to swallow it and then wait for the aftertaste. And all those things combined are what make up the taste. So one thing we use at the Phelps Maple Contest is this flavor wheel. Jamie put a copy of this up on Facebook for you to reference too. But basically this wheel is pointing out all the different flavors that you can pick up in maple syrup. Some of them are very pleasant, like, vanilla or, honey flavor, caramel. I don't mind those flavors in my syrup, but if it tastes like detergent, that's a little bit more off-putting. So let's go through some of these off flavors and where they come from so that you can avoid that problem. Well, detergent, if it tastes like detergent, it's probably because you washed something, some of your equipment, and you didn't rinse it thoroughly. If that's not the case, it may be your flat filters or your cone filter. If you had used soap to wash those filters the last time you used it, residues can stay in the fibers, and that will affect your maple syrup the next time you filter. So never use soap with your flat filters or cone filters. You're just going to use hot water, then lay it flat, let it dry completely before you store it. Another off flavor is caused by defoamer. Do you want to say anything about that?
If you'd like a tissue. So some people aren't familiar with defoaming. If you're boiling in a on a stovetop, maybe you don't quite get to the point where you need defoamer, or if you're boiling over some kind of a hand-me-down or homemade rig, you might not be boiling so hard that you need defoamer. Or maybe you need defoamer and you don't even know it. But the foam when you're boiling will come up and it could boil out of your pan, or the least it's going to do is insulate the sap and keep your water vapor from leaving as you're boiling. So you should never have a big liquid, a big foamy body on top of your sap. You should keep that away. There are commercial defoamers. A lot of the maple companies or maple suppliers will sell a maple syrup defoamer. There's about 24 ingredients in it that start with X or Y that I can't pronounce, so I do not use it. I refuse to use it. But you have to do something. Old timers used to hang bacon over the top of the boiling pan to make like an automatic defoamer. Just that grease, just something to break that surface tension is enough to keep the foam down. So bacon grease does work, but of course that comes with off flavors. Don't use bacon grease. Use something less odorous. What we settled on is canola oil, and it takes such a tiny amount. It's not like we're pouring oil in. We're not even dripping oil in. We're introducing a tiny residue from time to time. We most recently used a food-grade stainless steel brush and just kind of swiped it in the pan. But whatever you do, make sure your defoamer is non-offensive and make sure that it does not spoil. There are some types of things like maybe bacon grease that could make it spoil. Anything else you'd like me to cover?
How about burned syrup?
Yeah.
The burned taste.
Sure. Very unpleasant. If you burned a batch of syrup, get it very clean. Get the pan very, very clean. Whether it be soaking it with acid or vinegar or something to get it clean. Don't just pour it out and rinse it and think that that's good enough, because that burned sugar will impart a very harmful flavor.
Can you describe the scaling on the bottom of the front pan that we're talking about? Mm-hmm. Like what that is and where it comes from and why?
Yeah, so on a true maple syrup evaporator, a 2-pan system, or something like our hybrid pan, even some of our divided pans, you'll get a scale buildup at the draw-off. What that is mineral deposits called sugar sand or niter in our business. It's natural. It's in your sap. Just like well water, your sap carries minerals. As you evaporate, you're depriving that sap of minerals, and so they have to be deposited. The sap can't carry those minerals anymore, so they get baked down in your draw-off area. And again, if those get too thick, they will start scorching, because the liquid above those minerals is no longer protected, is no longer protecting those minerals from being burned by the hot fire in the stainless pan underneath. So that too can impart nasty flavor. Another thing about flavors, again, we'll cover some of these things in future videos, but when it comes to flavors or any unpleasant thing in syrup, whether it be visual, taste, any of the things we've covered, if you question it, don't put it in a bottle. Do not put it in the market. I've talked to people who say they don't like maple syrup. They were almost definitely fed a maple syrup that was subpar, and almost definitely the person who put that syrup in the bottle knew it was flawed. What that did was it removed that individual from the maple syrup market, probably for the rest of his life. If you question your syrup, don't put it in a retail container. Don't even gift it. If it's a poor quality and you know it's a poor quality, don't even gift that to someone. There's other things you can do with that syrup so that it doesn't go to waste, but if it's not table grade, don't take any chances with it.
Fermented? How does the fermented taste come about?
Yeah, so a fermented syrup will taste sort of like almost like an alcohol-y type thing, but in a bad way. And that will come from fermented sap. Again, if your sap sat outside in warm weather, or if it sat for too long, it actually started a fermenting process. And That displeasant odored sap or tasting sap will make an equal syrup. It's gonna be a poor quality syrup. There are things you can do with that. You can actually make syrup with that type of sap, but again, that's not table grade. You're not going to hand someone a bottle of syrup and expect them to eat that. You'll probably evaporate that all the way down, maybe to sugar, but it'll be used in a sweetener where the flavor won't be prevalent. It'll be used with a bunch of tomato sauce or something that all you're trying to do is use the sugars from that as a sweetener. You're not relying on it for a maple flavor. So there's ways to use that, but again, that'll never be table grade.
Good. All right. I have just one more on the list, which is actually, I've got a cool prop here. This is the inside of a tree. You can see, here's the bark, and then this was just cut so that you could see old tap holes in it. So the holes on the outside are pretty much healed, but you can still see them on the inside. You can also see the staining that happens by each tap hole. And the reason I'm telling you this is, and showing you this, is because if you drill into this stained area or into the same tap hole area the next year, your syrup may have more of an earthy flavor. Another bad place to drill is into a punky part of the wood. So you have to drill into good wood. Always look for, you can see on the outside of the bark where the tap holes used to be. So make sure you, here's one. Make sure you find those and don't drill there again. Give yourself enough room to be outside of that stain. So I guess that's pretty much all I have on my outline, but I'll just recap quick. So we talked about tasting with our eyes. You want to have a good first impression. We talked about plastic and glass and the pros and cons of those things. We also talked about density and how that can affect your first impression. Having crystals at the bottom might affect perception and what a person thinks of your taste. Tasting with our nose. We want to make sure we're bottling syrup that has a pleasant smell. Tasting by feeling. We don't want any ropey syrup or gritty syrup. Tasting with our tongue. We just went through a bunch of the different off flavors that you can see in the flavor wheel. And that's pretty much it. You got to think about taste all the way throughout your process, from tapping to filtering to bottling. And we would love to hear any questions you have. Jamie, I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Jim, Matt. We're here at Smoky Lake Maple Products here in Hilbert, Wisconsin. And follow us on Facebook. Send us your questions and comments. We'll be glad to get back to you, whether it's live or not. Also, for the forum is coming soon. We hope the next couple of weeks that we'll be able to be fully up and running, UnitedMapleProducers.org. So come and join us on Facebook and let's engage. Thank you very much. We're good.